At 7:40 on the morning of February 15th, 1944, Lieutenant, junior grade, Nathan Gordon sat alone with his thoughts in the cockpit of a PBY Catalina, orbiting low over the dark, rolling waters of the Bismarck Sea. To the north, 15 miles away, columns of thick black smoke clawed upward from Caveying Harbor, smearing the pale sky above New Ireland. The Japanese anti-aircraft batteries had opened fire minutes earlier. Gordon didn't need the radio to tell him that American aircraft were being hit. He could see it happening. Gordon was 27 years old, with 18 months of combat flying behind him in the Southwest Pacific. He already wore the Distinguished Flying Cross, not for fighting, but for rescuing men who had been shot out of the sky. He commanded a 9-man crew aboard a lumbering gray flying boat he had named Arkansas Traveler. They belonged to Patrol Squadron 34, the Black Cats, based at Samurai Island in Milne Bay, Papua New Guinea. Their job was not to attack, not to bomb, not to fight. Their job was to wait. That morning, Gordon's orders were simple. Hold position near the Vito Islands, southwest of Caveying. Monitor distress frequencies. If any American aircraft went down, go get the crews. Above Caveying, the 5th Air Force had committed nearly everything it could throw at the harbor. For squadrons of A-20 Havocs from the 3rd Bombardment Group screamed in at low level, strafing shipping and shore positions at altitudes so low some pilots skimmed the tops of waves. Behind them came 7 squadrons of B-25 Mitchells from the 38th and 345th Bomb Groups, pounding port facilities, fuel dumps, and troop concentrations. The Japanese were ready. Caveying sat at the northern tip of New Ireland, one of the most heavily fortified positions in the entire Bismarck archipelago. Anti-aircraft guns ringed the harbor. Machine gun nests covered the beaches. Every approach, air or sea, was locked inside overlapping fields of fire built and reinforced over 2 years. By mid-morning, 8 American aircraft had already been shot down. 8 crews, dozens of men. In the Pacific, rescue was a matter of brutal arithmetic. A pilot who ditched far out at sea had a chance. Search planes could find him. Flying boats could land, if the water was calm, and pull him out. The ocean was vast, but survival was possible if rescue came fast. A pilot who went down near an enemy-held shoreline faced a different reality. The Japanese did not take prisoners. Not here, not anymore. Airmen who survived a crash near Japanese positions faced 2 outcomes: drown in the water or wash ashore and die later. Only one aircraft in the Pacific could even attempt rescues under fire, the PBY Catalina. It could land on open water. It could taxi. It could take off again, in theory. In practice, the Catalina was a flying barn. 65 feet long, with a 104-foot wingspan, and a top speed barely touching 179 miles per hour. Against fighters, it was helpless. Against shore-based guns, it was a slow-moving target the size of a house. The Navy called these missions Dumbos. Search and rescue flights into hostile waters. Crews flew them knowing the rules. Stay outside gun range. Wait for fighter cover. Don't land unless the sea allows it. Don't push your luck. But rules meant little when men were drowning. At 8:15, Gordon's radio man broke the silence. An A-20 Havoc had been hit over Caveying. The aircraft was going down. The crew had seconds to bail out. Gordon turned Arkansas Traveler toward the smoke. 4 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 348th Fighter Group slid into position overhead. They were his escort, his shield against Japanese fighters and guns. For fighters against one of the most heavily defended harbors in the Pacific, the math was terrible. The sea below was worse. Waves were breaking at 16 to 18 feet, heavy swells rolling endlessly toward the harbor mouth. Worse still, there was almost no wind, which meant almost no lift for takeoff. According to the flight manual, a landing was suicidal. Gordon knew it. Every Catalina pilot did. 18-foot swells exceeded every safety limit the aircraft had. The risk of smashing the hull was extreme. The risk of capsizing was real. But somewhere below, Americans were dying. Gordon pushed the throttles forward. Arkansas Traveler began to descend. Japanese gunners tracked the huge flying boat as it dropped toward the water, disbelief turning into anticipation. No pilot had ever been reckless enough to attempt this. Landing a Catalina on calm seas required skill. Landing one in seas like this required something closer to madness. The aircraft weighed nearly 27,000 pounds with fuel, crew, and rescue gear aboard. Dropping that mass onto moving walls of water at landing speed meant forces strong enough to tear metal apart. Gordon lined up his approach, trying to thread the aircraft between wave crests, not onto them. He mistimed it. The Catalina slammed into a wave at nearly 80 miles per hour. The impact shook the aircraft like a hammer blow. Gordon heard metal scream as the hull flexed beyond its limits. Warning lights flickered. The aircraft bounced, struck again, and finally settled into the churning sea. They were down. They were floating, but barely. Water poured through burst seams along the hull. Bilge pumps kicked on automatically, fighting a losing battle. The flight engineer reported multiple leaks in the lower fuselage, and there were no survivors. The A-20 crew was gone. Gordon taxied through the swells, searching desperately. Life rafts, debris, anything. Nothing. The Japanese guns stayed silent. Gordon knew what that meant. They were waiting for him to drift closer. Every second on the water made his situation worse. Standard procedure demanded immediate takeoff and return to base. Then the radio crackled again. A B-25 Mitchell from the 38th Bomb Group had been hit. The aircraft was down in the water. 5 crewmen were alive. The coordinates placed them inside Japanese gun range. Gordon looked at his damaged aircraft, at his crew, at the rising smoke over cavying. 5 men were dying less than a mile from enemy guns. He turned Arkansas Traveler toward them. The takeoff nearly killed them. With almost no wind, the Catalina struggled to climb onto the step. Waves battered the hull. Spray blinded the cockpit. Engines screamed at full power. For nearly a full minute, the aircraft refused to fly. Gordon held the controls steady, knowing physics would decide whether they lived or died. And the decision was not finished yet. The Catalina finally broke free. After nearly a minute clawing at the sea, Arkansas Traveler staggered into the air, water streaming from her battered hull. Gordon held her low, nursing the wounded aircraft away from the first landing site. The bilge pumps groaned beneath his feet, fighting a flood they were already losing. That was when the Japanese guns opened fire. Tracers arced upward from the shoreline, long red lines reaching for the climbing flying boat. Gordon ignored them. He had 5 men to save, and his aircraft was already breaking apart. The second distress call placed the B-25 Mitchell inside the Japanese kill zone. The bomber had gone down less than 1 mile from shore, close enough for enemy gunners to see the survivors in the water, close enough for accurate fire, close enough that any rescue aircraft would be flying directly into overlapping fields of fire from multiple gun positions. Gordon turned toward the coordinates anyway. The P-47 Thunderbolts dove ahead of him, hammering the coastline with 8.50 caliber machine guns each. Their pilots worked systematically, walking fire across visible gun pits, concrete emplacements, anything that looked like it could shoot back. It wasn't enough. There were too many guns. The Japanese fire slackened, but never stopped. Arkansas Traveler descended through a curtain of tracers. Below, Gordon saw the wreckage. The B-25 had broken apart on impact, scattering debris across hundreds of yards of water. 5 men clung to fragments of aluminum and a partially inflated life raft. They had been in the sea for nearly 20 minutes. Some were barely moving. The second landing was marginally better than the first. Gordon timed it carefully, dropping the Catalina between wave crests instead of onto them. The impact was still brutal. The hull groaned. More seams burst open. More water poured in. But the aircraft stayed afloat. Gordon taxied toward the survivors. This was the most dangerous moment of any sea rescue. To pull men from the water, the Catalina had to stop. To stop safely, the engines had to be shut down. Otherwise, the spinning propellers would kill the very men they were trying to save. A stationary flying boat, engine silent, was completely defenseless. Gordon shut both engines down. Arkansas Traveler drifted helplessly in the swells. The Japanese guns fired immediately. Water spouts erupted around the aircraft as shells bracketed their position. The gunners adjusted with every salvo, walking their fire closer. Inside the Catalina, Gordon's crew moved with desperate precision. The waist gunners abandoned their weapons and climbed into the observation blisters, reaching down into the sea. The flight engineer shouted updates over the intercom while tracking the rising water in the hull. The first survivor came aboard bleeding from shrapnel wounds. The second was barely conscious, dragged up by his flight suit. 3 more followed in rapid succession. 5 men rescued. 14 souls now aboard a damaged flying boat designed to carry 9. Gordon restarted the engines. The Japanese gunners had the range now. Shells were landing within 50 yards. The next salvo would be closer. Gordon shoved the throttles forward. The takeoff run was chaos. The Catalina was heavier now, riding lower in the water, sluggish on the controls. The damaged hull dragged through the swells like an anchor. There was still almost no wind. For nearly 90 seconds, the aircraft refused to fly. Shells fell around them. The crew braced for impact. The rescued airmen could only watch as the men risking their lives for them fought to save everyone. Then, finally, Arkansas Traveler lifted free. She staggered into the air, engines screaming, water pouring from her hull. They had done it. Gordon turned southwest toward Samurai Island. Then the radio crackled again. Another B-25 was down. Another crew in the water. This time the coordinates were even closer to shore. And 2 of Gordon's 4 P-47 escorts were critically low on fuel. They had to return to base immediately. Gordon looked at his aircraft, at his exhausted crew, at the wounded men filling every available space. He had every reason to turn for home. No one would have blamed him. He turned back toward Caving Harbor. The third landing pushed Arkansas Traveler beyond any reasonable limit of survival. Only 2 P-47s remained overhead. The Japanese gunners had watched 2 rescues now. They knew exactly what the slow-flying boat was doing. They were ready. The third B-25 had gone down roughly 1 mile from shore. 4 men had reached a rubber life raft. They were drifting steadily toward Japanese-held beach with every passing minute. Gordon descended again. The Thunderbolts strafed the coast, but their ammunition was running low. Their passes were shorter, less effective. The Japanese waited them out, resuming fire the moment the fighters pulled away. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. The Catalina's hull was in critical condition. Multiple seams had split open. The bilge pumps ran constantly. Salt water sloshed through the lower fuselage, adding hundreds of pounds of dead weight. The third landing was violent. Gordon misjudged a swell. The impact sent shudders through the airframe. Something deep in the hull gave way. Flooding increased. But the aircraft stayed together. Gordon taxied toward the life raft as fast as the battered Catalina could move. Shells landed within yards now. The Japanese gunners could see everything: the aircraft, the men, the rescue. They were determined to stop it. Gordon shut the engines down for the 3rd time. His crew pulled the 4 survivors aboard in under 2 minutes. No wasted movement. No hesitation. 18 men now crowded an aircraft built for 9. The 3rd takeoff was the closest call yet. The Catalina sat dangerously low in the water. The engines strained against the load. The swells seemed to grab the hull, refusing to let go. Gordon held full power for over 2 minutes. Nothing. Shells walked closer. 100 yards. 75. 50. The next salvo would hit. Then, at the last possible second, Arkansas Traveler broke free. The aircraft staggered into the air, engines howling, water streaming behind her. 18 men airborne. Gordon turned for home. His aircraft was dying. His crew was spent. Every minute aloft risked catastrophic failure. Then the radio spoke again. A third B-25 had gone down. 6 crewmen alive. Their life raft was visible from the air. The coordinates placed them 600 yards from shore. Close enough to see individual Japanese soldiers on the beach. Close enough for rifle fire. Close enough that this time, the math truly stopped making sense. At 600 yards, the Japanese could have swum out and taken the survivors themselves. And now Gordon was alone. The last 2 P-47 Thunderbolts radioed in, fuel critical. They were turning south, back toward Finschhafen. Within seconds, they were gone, shrinking into the haze. No fighter escort. A crippled aircraft. 18 men already aboard. 6 more Americans drifting toward an enemy shore. Gordon had every justification to refuse. His Catalina was structurally compromised. His crew was exhausted. 9 rescued airmen needed immediate medical attention. Every regulation, every flight manual, every calculation of self-preservation demanded the same answer. Go home. Gordon ran the math anyway. The 4th rescue site lay directly beneath the heaviest Japanese defenses at Caving. Gun emplacements lined the coast. Artillery overlooked the water. At 600 yards, the enemy wouldn't need anti-aircraft guns, field artillery, heavy machine guns. Even rifle fire would be lethal. No American aircraft had ever attempted a water landing this close to an occupied enemy shore. There was a reason. Below him, the 6 men in the water were still alive. They had survived the crash. They had reached life rafts. They were drifting steadily toward land held by an enemy that did not take prisoners. Gordon knew what happened to captured airmen in this theater. There were no forward POW camps, no processing, no transport inland. Men simply vanished. 6 families back in the United States would never receive answers. Only telegrams that said missing, then presumed dead. Gordon turned Arkansas Traveler back toward Caveying Harbor. For the 4th time, the escorts were gone now. Whatever happened next, he would face it without protection. But he was not entirely alone. Several B-25 Mitchells from the morning raid had already dropped their bombs. When word spread that a Catalina was attempting a 4th rescue inside the harbor defenses, their pilots made a decision of their own. They turned back. The bombers couldn't land. They couldn't rescue anyone. But they could strafe. They could force Japanese gunners to keep their heads down for a few minutes. They could buy Gordon a chance. The B-25 swept in low, hammering the shoreline with machine gun fire. Tracers stitched across gun pits, trenches, and tree lines. Japanese anti-aircraft fire erupted in response, filling the sky with black bursts and red streaks. Behind them, Arkansas Traveler descended. Gordon traded altitude for speed, minimizing the time spent inside the kill zone. The Catalina felt like a building rather than an airplane. Heavy, damaged, sluggish. The controls resisted every input. At 600 yards, Gordon could see individual Japanese soldiers on the beach. He could see muzzle flashes aimed directly at him. He could see the life rafts. 6 men looking up at a flying boat that had no business being there. Gordon committed. There would be no go-around. The hull struck the water. The 4th landing was unlike anything Gordon had ever experienced. This time, the Japanese did not adjust fire. They didn't need to. They could see the aircraft as clearly as a ship in harbor. They opened fire the instant the hull touched. Heavy machine gun rounds punched through the Catalina's thin aluminum skin. The impacts echoed through the fuselage, metal tearing, rivets popping, glass shattering. There was no cover inside the aircraft. Only aluminum and air. Gordon kept the Catalina moving. He could not stop. A stationary aircraft was a dead aircraft. He taxied at maximum speed, waves breaking over the bow, tracers slicing through the spray. The B-25s made another strafing run. Japanese fire faltered for seconds. Gordon used them. The first raft held 4 men. 2 were badly wounded, unable to climb. Gordon's crew hauled them through the blisters as bullets struck the fuselage around them. 1 waist gunner returned fire toward the shore, not to hit anything, just to make the enemy duck. The second raft held 2 more survivors. 1 unconscious, 1 bleeding heavily. They came aboard anyway. 24 men now occupied an aircraft designed to carry 9. Gordon did not wait. He shoved the throttles forward while his crew was still pulling the last survivor inside. The takeoff began 600 yards from the enemy shore. The Catalina barely rose onto the step. Water poured through split seams. The engine screamed after hours at maximum power. The aircraft would not fly. Airspeed crept upward. 60 knots. 65, 70. Minimum takeoff speed was 75. With this load, Gordon needed more than 85. He did not have the distance. Japanese gunners understood immediately. They concentrated fire. Shells walked in. Water spouts erupted around the aircraft. Shrapnel tore into the wings and fuselage. Gordon held course. He could not turn, could not maneuver, could not do anything but keep the throttles buried and hope physics gave him one last favor. At 82 knots, Arkansas Traveler broke free. Not a climb, more a refusal to sink. The aircraft clawed into the air, climb rate near 0, engines overheating, hull leaking through a dozen new holes. But they were airborne. Gordon turned south, away from caveying, away from the guns, away from a morning that should have killed them all. Behind him lay 6 men who would have vanished without a trace. Ahead lay Samurai Island, medical care, and an aircraft that might not hold together long enough to reach it. But for now, they were alive. If Arkansas Traveler held together for 200 miles, they might live. That was the calculation now. 200 miles of open ocean. 24 men crammed into an aircraft designed for 9. A hull riddled with bullet holes, leaking through dozens of split seams. Engines that had been run at full power for hours. Fuel gauges that could no longer be trusted. Gordon climbed to cruising altitude and eased the throttles back. The engines protested, coughing and running rough for several long seconds before settling into an uneven, fragile rhythm. The Catalina vibrated constantly, a physical reminder that the airframe was no longer whole. Below the cockpit, water sloshed through the lower fuselage. The bilge pumps ran without pause, fighting a losing battle against gravity and damage. Every shift of weight changed the aircraft's balance. Gordon worked the trim continuously, correcting small instabilities before they grew into something fatal. The rescued airmen were in bad shape. Several were bleeding heavily. One drifted in and out of consciousness. Gordon's crew did what they could with bandages, pressure dressings, and tourniquets. There was no real medical care available at altitude, only the hope that they could keep the wounded alive long enough to reach land. Every minute mattered. Samurai Island finally appeared on the horizon nearly 2 hours later. The seaplane base at Milne Bay had been listening to Gordon's radio transmissions. They knew what he had attempted. They knew his aircraft was damaged. They did not know if he would make it back. Gordon brought Arkansas Traveler down for her 5th landing of the day. This one was perfect. The approach was steady. The touchdown gentle. For a brief moment, it seemed the aircraft might survive after all. Then the damage caught up. Seams that had held through 4 combat landings finally failed. Water poured in faster than the pumps could move it. The Catalina began to sink almost immediately. Rescue boats reached her within minutes. 24 men were pulled from the aircraft one by one. The wounded were transferred to waiting medical teams. Gordon's crew stumbled onto the dock, exhausted beyond speech. Arkansas Traveler settled into the shallow water of Milne Bay. She would never fly again. Within hours, reports of the mission spread through the Pacific Command. Many assumed exaggeration. For landings under fire, 15 men rescued. A final pickup 600 yards from enemy guns without fighter escort. Witness statements erased all doubt. The P-47 pilots confirmed it. The B-25 crews confirmed it. The rescued airmen confirmed it. Lieutenant, junior grade, Nathan Gordon had done exactly what the reports claimed. Admiral William F. Halsey received the full account. He had seen heroism throughout the Pacific War, but this was different. He sent a personal message to Gordon's squadron, calling the rescue at Caving Harbor one of the most remarkable feats of the war. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved forward immediately. In September 1944, 7 months after the mission, Gordon stood at attention in Brisbane, Australia. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid pinned the medal to his chest. Gordon became the only PBY Catalina pilot ever to receive the nation's highest military decoration. His 8 crew members received the Silver Star. Gordon survived the war. So did the 15 men he pulled from the water, men who should have disappeared without trace along a hostile shoreline. Some returned to combat. Some went home. All lived because one pilot refused to abandon them. Gordon continued flying rescue missions until the war's end. He added 2 more distinguished flying crosses and 6 air medals. He left the Navy in October 1945 as one of the most decorated rescue pilots of the war. He returned to Arkansas, opened a law practice, married, entered public service. For 20 years, he served as Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas, longer than anyone before or since. He rarely spoke about Caving Harbor. When asked, he redirected attention to his crew, the men who hauled survivors aboard while bullets tore through the fuselage, who trusted him to bring them home alive. The men he rescued never forgot. They wrote letters. They made phone calls. Some traveled across the country to shake his hand. Those meetings mattered to Gordon more than medals or office. Arkansas Traveler never flew again, but the name endured. Every Catalina Gordon commanded afterward carried it, a quiet tribute to an aircraft that should not have survived, and somehow did. Nathan Gordon died in 2008 at the age of 92. 15 men lived because, on one morning in February 1944, a pilot refused to calculate the odds. For landings under fire, 600 yards from enemy guns, a flying boat that had no business still flying, and a crew that never hesitated.